So I'm David Evans. I'm a public affairs manager at NHS providers, and as we've been talking about, I've been a parliamentary candidate and I'm an alumnus of the University of Aberdeen.
Thank you very much. And how did you end up at the University of Aberdeen?
I'm from the Northeast originally, so had some quite strong connections to the university already. In fact, I've got very fond memories of what used to be the cafe in front of King's College Conference Centre. It's now just a reception hall. It used to be a cafe with my auntie Jen, who used to take my sister and I for coffee there frequently when I was very, very small. I think for more practical reasons. I ended up going to the University of Aberdeen because it was in the year that I started, which is longer ago than I care to admit. It was Aberdeen was the best law school in the country, and law was obviously my degree. Um, I think finally it was. Actually, I was a student ambassador at my time at the university, and one of my memories of giving advice to somebody else was something that has rung true for me. I think studying, you should really study where you feel comfortable.
Why did you decide to study law at Aberdeen?
Why law?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, there was an initial silly interest. I remember giving this answer on the Aberdeen visit day. Liar, Liar, the Jim Carrey film, was one of my absolute favorite films as a kid. Um, And weirdly, I was thinking about, is this the answer I want to give to this question? Um, his transition and where he ends up is the bit that always really resonated with me. The bit where he becomes the better person and starts doing what's right. That was kind of why law resonated with me originally. I sort of realized on the way, and realized through sort of going to different universities, and it was sort of at the same sort of time my interest in politics kicked off. So I was weighing up whether I wanted to study PIR, politics and international relations, or whether or not I wanted to study law. And I think in a purely practical sense, I realized you could be a politician with a law degree, but you couldn't be a lawyer with a PIR degree.
Okay.
Um, uh, I think finally there is a solid base in sort of critical thinking and analytical skills that comes with many degrees, not just law, but law in particular that have been quite useful for me throughout my career. I've done a lot of, I've had some very varied roles, but a lot of them have had that need to read and understand things quickly, to think analytically, to join the dots between very uh, to join the dots. And I suppose I've had a sort of legislative bent. I've been a benefits assessor. I've done information governance, which is sort of legal heavy areas. And then I suppose when you come into the more political public affairs space where I am now, understanding not just how laws are made, how they affect things can be quite useful. Which is sort of why I stuck with it after I realized perhaps a legal career was not quite the direction I wanted to go. But it definitely. So yes, it started with a silly interest that seemed intensely sensible the further along I got.
That's very interesting. Thank you. And the next question is, and what were some of your favorite memories from the university something you enjoyed a lot?
I think, I mean, there's the obvious answer that I was probably more into the social side of university than an academic. I'm probably not the most academically accomplished of the university's alumni, but I think that there is certainly value to that social aspect. So, and I talked briefly about when we were doing the introduction that. I was involved with politics at the university. That builds relationships that I still use and people I still deal with on a day-to-day basis. I think it did kindle areas of interest that I still use now. I was always really interested in public law subjects. Greatly enjoyed fairly certain he's still a reader at the university, Mike Radfort's Government and Public Administration Honours course, which was one of my highlights. A fantastic lecturer, and Dr. Heather Green, Civil Liberties and Human Rights, and and particularly enjoyed sort of. I'm of the generation that did the old style law degree where we didn't really get to stray out of law very much. So greatly enjoyed a lecture, a series of lectures that was taken by Dr. James Grieve. That's Grieve, not Greaves or Greavesy, who took forensic medicine for lawyers. And I greatly enjoyed again, returning to those core skills of why I thought the degree was valuable, the analytical skills, the critical thinking skills, and taking them in a slightly different direction and looking at forensic medicine. So yeah, favorite memories probably in the bobbin more than I should have been,
Yeah.
but uh, probably in the student union less than I should have been, to be fair. Um, but all in all, yeah, an interesting if boozy experience.
Yeah.
Apart from the bobbin, what kind of other social kind of circles were you part of? Any societies or core groups?
Core one was the University of Aberdeen Liberal Democrats. I was a member from the day I went to university, actually, and before I was at a wedding of the president who was earlier this year, of the president who was president when I joined, and was there right until the end, president in my third year. I was a member of the Law Society through my period there, which is always a great way to make connections across the legal profession. And I was also a member of what was at the time the LGBT Society. I believe it's defunct now, but AbFab, as was a cornerstone of my social life at university in particularly my first and second year. I think finding your community at university is definitely something that makes it a lot easier, and can be quite rewarding.
What were some kind of core lessons or yeah, like lessons that you learned from said societies?
Um, that's a good question. I think how to say no was sort of an important one. I think I did talk about sort of leaning into the social side of university a bit more because it's where I'm more comfortable. And I suppose I foreshadowed I'm probably not the most academically accomplished person that you will ever speak to in this process. Um, I think perhaps my time as president at the University of Aberdeen Liberal Democrats, I would have been better if I'd said no. At that sort of time, I was taking resits in my third year. I'd had a pretty rough time of it. Um, and had agreed to do it so that the society could continue. Whereas probably the best thing for my degree would have been to no, I need to focus on two resits and getting this over the line. So yes, that learning to say no was probably one of the better lessons I took away from that. Um, I suppose also it's a recurring theme for me. Most of my work is based around connections with people. Um, so, though I wish I maybe said no to some things, the connections I made with people through the university and through those sort of social aspects have been things that I still use, and skills I still use now. It's interesting that being vaguely personable and a straight shooter can actually be marketable skills when you get to the other side of this.
Yeah, would you say like that students should kind of reach out more and become more sociable and join more societies as a way to kind of network and gain important knowledge that they cannot gain in lectures?
Yeah, I think I suppose that's the counterpoint to my critique of my over socializing that. Particularly as someone who's just been through a period of recruitment now, I've just recruited to my own team. Um, I, and particularly in my line of work, you need people. You, and I think people underestimate how much of that is a learned skill. It's not. you are not naturally personable. You don't naturally pick up those networking skills, and university societies are a good way to pick that up. I think particularly the political societies, but you will probably find the same, and I suppose I would definitely have found the same with the Law Society if I'd gone into practice. Those connections that you make in the Law Society and beyond will be really useful. Those connections that I made in the political society are really useful and beyond. And then the skills you learn. Networking is a skill, and you pick that up in societies, not in the lecture theatre.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And what kind of work do you do for NHS, for providers?
So I am a public affairs manager, and I suppose probably the more commonly understood and lesser used term, well, less likely used term is I'm a lobbyist. I manage and communicate with our primarily political stakeholders. So NHS providers represents NHS trusts in England. That's covering mental health, acute, specialist services, ambulance services. And I suppose the value of, and my two public affairs organisations, I was at an organisation called Offshore Energies UK. Prior to that, were both member organisations. So it's interesting to be able to talk to a broader countrywide narrative in a way that an NHS trust, I suppose, or a health board, if you're north of the border, just can't do. We can talk to the broader national picture and how health policy is affecting trusts as a whole in a way that an individual trust or board could not.
Yeah. What are some of the much needed skills apart from like networking and public speaking that are required to kind of succeed in your field?
I think, and it's why I mentioned that the law degree has been particularly useful in this particular context, an understanding of legislation and how it works, an understanding of politics and how it works, as the two are very separate, are fairly fundamental. Or if it's a field that's of interest to any of your readers or listeners, that it's something you need to be prepared and to demonstrate and a willingness to understand. So yeah, it brings it back to that sort of core critical thinking and analytical skills, but the networking certainly helps.
Um, so can you walk us through your day-to-day work routine, like what you do and what your kind of main job role is?
Yeah, certainly. So I suppose. Part of my job is to be the eyes and ears of the organisation in Parliament. Usually, actually, someone who my first job out of university was with NHS Grampian a long time ago now. So I am a high functioning caffeine addict. So it starts with a cup of coffee. And a listening of the Today programme, which is the cornerstone of my morning. Getting up to speed with what's coming in the day ahead, checking the order paper for Parliament, or directing my team to do so, depending on availability of time. Our day kicks off with a joint media and policy call, which my part in that meeting is to forward look and horizon scan, and that's the process of doing that is usually a massive part of my day. So I'm checking in with what's happening in Parliament, what's going to be in front of the Select Committee, what's on individual MPs' minds, and making sure that they're well prepared for what is coming. I think tomorrow we're expecting the mental health bill, which is of particular interest to our members, to be introduced in the House of Lords. It's just a stage one, so I'm sure I don't have to tell you chaps that that's the short and long title and not a massive debate. But it's getting the organisation ready to contribute to that, as like I said, NHS providers represents mental health trusts as one of our umbrella of members, and getting in front of that, making sure that we are informing government of what mental health trusts need in this process, making sure that the process takes into account their needs and wants, is going to be a massive part of my next couple of months. So, and preparing for other elements of the legislative process and the scrutiny of government work. So we've obviously got the new Health and Social Care Committee, which is being headed up by Liberal Democrat Layla Moran. We've got who is new to that role, and taking over from a fairly well-known MP to us. So building those relationships, making sure that we can get our briefings in front of the select committee, that we can feed into them doing their work. A lot of I think a lot of people try to look at lobbying as a sort of exercising undue influence, whereas to me, it is making sure that those in positions of power have everything that they need to make the best possible decisions. And there will be people who will make completely different arguments to me, but it's my job to take the best evidence and the best quality information to our political and government stakeholders.
Mhm.
Thank you. And you had such an interesting career. What was the proudest moment during your career?
I think actually it would have been landing my first public affairs job, uh, particularly because that period of transition can be really scary. Uh, and and I imagine that's probably something that will resonate with students who are thinking about how do I transition from university to the world of work. The jump from Parliament, where I had been for the 4 years previous, into public affairs is by no means a given. It's some people are just not suited to it. So I suppose landing that job, realizing that my skills were transferable and that I wasn't trapped in Parliament for the rest of my life, was, I would say, quite a big achievement. That's not to say I'm not proud of the roles I played in Parliament. And I think definitely a career highlight for me was I worked in the 2017 to 2019 Parliament. So that the cursed B word, that Brexit period, a lot of focus on immigration um, and policies geared towards, rightly or wrongly, towards reducing it. Uh, While I was working there, the MP I worked for had a constituent whose child was stuck in a war zone. And the Home Office decided now was the appropriate time to question whether or not this person was entitled to be in the UK. And so finally getting a 2-year-old by the time we managed to get her out of Iraq back into the country and playing my part in that was really rewarding, getting this wee baby into the office at the tail end. So I'm quite proud of good parliamentary staff. You don't tend to know they're there. So I'm quite proud of the parts I played in delivering that work. And this was contrary to the popular belief, not all lobbyists have massive egos. I'm quite happy to work in the shadows.
Are there any books or podcasts that you found particularly beneficial for your career? They might be like career related or non-career related. Maybe some books motivate you or something like that.
I suppose my Bible, since going into Parliament and then even after, how to be a parliamentary researcher, as it's written tongue in cheek, which suits my personality a lot better, but explains Parliament in a way that is really relatable and understandable and transferable because it's sort of timeless and a lot easier to read than Erskine May. And so anyone, I would recommend to anyone who is planning on either going on to be a parliamentary researcher or indeed a public affairs professional that needs to learn to understand Parliament quickly, how to be a parliamentary researcher was and remains my Bible. I'm also, I suppose it's not a particular podcast, but it's a sort of concept that I think is useful, or certainly was useful to me when one of the motivational speakers that came into one of our staff away days at NHS providers talked about squiggly careers, um, which sort of dropped into place things I knew and things I do. Um, long gone are the days where you go in as a bank clerk and leave as the bank manager when you retire 50 years later and you've always worked for RBS. Those days are done. And you touched on that I've dotted around a lot in my career and what career progression looks like, what collecting skills and experience looks like. To me means moving around and being a bit more squiggly. And I moved from Parliament into an entirely different profession, I suppose poacher turned gamekeeper or gamekeeper turned poacher, depending on your point of view. Um, and then after doing 4 years in energy, made the jump to health, which are two very different and very heavy areas of policy. But I don't think people should let that put them off, and particularly when if public affairs is your interest, your skill is being a public affairs professional. Your skill is managing stakeholders and understanding how Parliament works and how government works and advising an organisation on that. Um, the portfolio you can learn as you go, and I hope I've done that. Um,
Would you say dotting around can have a big positive benefit to your career?
I think so. It's certainly, I suppose one of the things I found most useful in my present role is, I suppose it gives you a benchmark and some and things to compare to. So, um, both organizations I have been part of have had some, I suppose to some quite intimidating structural change, like a change of chief executive is sort of in the works for NHS providers now. Happened in my third year at Offshore Energies UK, and some people find that quite intimidating. Whereas for me, it's par for the course and also a massive opportunity. So I think yes, it gets you familiar with different organisations, how they work, what's normal and what's not normal. So yes, I think dotting around's an advantage. It makes it easier to see the wood for the trees, I suppose.
Thank you. And the next question is, you mentioned that students should like improve their networking skills, but what's your advice on how students can best utilize these networking skills? Maybe reaching out to like professionals, asking for advice or anything like that.
Um, I suppose it's something I learned. I am naturally very self-deprecating. I think most people are. Um, I suppose it was something I initially picked up in terms of I've been very lucky to have good managers, and a good manager will always look to support you in your growth journey. I think that applies to quite a lot of people that students might think, no, I don't want to reach out to them because who am I and why would they be interested? A lot of people in senior positions are very happy to share their experience and chat about that. How much use that will be to you, I suppose, is ultimately for you to find out. There'll be some duds. I might be one of them, but I think we let the nervousness of looking silly get in the way of meaningful connection. And my advice would be, certainly in my experience, people in senior positions are usually a lot more happy to mentor you than you might think. They're usually a lot more happy to share their insights and their take than you might think. And there is absolutely nothing to stop you, and there should be nothing to stop you from taking a punt and reaching out, because I think you will find you are successful more often than you are not.
Yeah. So you think just like to kind of shoot the shot and reach out to people, yeah.
Yeah, certainly I think so. And the can we have a quick cup of coffee is never a question I ever regret asking. At the very worst, you're going to have a cup of coffee and a decent chat for 20 minutes. You might get, and I've been very lucky to get some very useful insight from colleagues, senior people in my professional field. And I suppose occasionally at the law school in Aberdeen, oh, can we have a quick chat was usually the best question I ever asked. So yes, don't get hung up on feeling stupid. And I think I think that's another thing that I've sort of picked up along the way, that we let worry about looking daft get in the way of things that will ultimately really help us. So yeah, reach out would be my advice.
And the last question for the day would be, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I suppose it ties into that. I was very fortunate after I stood in Banff and Buchan in 2015 to be asked to go back and address the prize giving at my old secondary school, so Ellen Academy, out north of the city. Um, Bearing in mind that, yes, this was just after I'd got completely gubbed in 2015. I'd kept my deposit by point 0.1 of a point 0.1 of a percent. Um, so I'd agreed to do it. So like, what do I know about success and what it takes to be successful? The advice, what I landed on, and it's become something that I come back to quite frequently, is that we allow failure to be an end point. And failure is not an end point. It's what you do after that that's the most important thing. The the best learning opportunities you will probably get are the ones where you've made a mistake or you've fallen flat on your face. It's what you do when you get back up is the really important bit. Um, and oddly enough, I ended up working with somebody that was in that prize giving. She was a former pupil that I ended up working with when I was at Offshore Energies UK, um, who had a non-traditional, this was much like myself, a non-traditional path through her career, and she hadn't done particularly well. She had done well at high school. Actually, I think had fallen into the same trap as me, where she'd not applied herself particularly well academically, and then had gone to college and taken a more circuitous route. She's now probably one of the best qualified people I know in her particular field. Um, and she said that she always looked back on me absolutely terrified at 25, standing in front of this room of kids, uh, telling them that failure's not the worst possible thing. Dust yourself off, remember you're a work in progress, and move on to the next thing. So I suppose the advice I would give my younger self is not to get hung up on the failures, not to get hung up on, like I said, my third year ride at the University of Aberdeen was pretty rough. That was my own doing, but apply myself, pick myself up, and get back to it. I was fortunate that my tutor and the university were very understanding of the mistakes I made, and I pulled through, and I graduated and have been successful since. But yeah, it's don't get hung up on the failure.